local governments regarding decisions made pursuant to the planning laws. And it's on that basis that there is this very short, admittedly very short, 90-day statute of limitations to, for instance, challenge an entire general plan, or to challenge the circulation element of a general plan, or to challenge the conservation element of the general plan, or any of the 9 mandatory elements of the general plan. There's a 90-day statute of limitations. There is a longer statute of limitations for a housing element, according to the Urban Habitats case. Okay? But the Urban Habitats court said, this statute says already that certainty is important, and we need short statutes of limitations. So they came up with this statute, which is the 60-day notice plus the 1 year. It was said earlier by the proponents of the bill that that means that they have to evaluate the entire housing element within a 90-day period and quickly decide what's wrong and sue. But actually, that's the benefit of the existing 1-year time period. The notice of what's wrong needs to be given, but then there's an entire year to bring the lawsuit. Now, why is the certainty important? The certainty is important because the housing element determines how, where, and whether development can go forward. Property owners and local governments need to know whether the plan complies with the law. Otherwise, as your analysis points out, if the housing element is not adequate, the court has the authority to stop all building permits, stop all zone changes, stop all subdivision approvals. I mean, we're now affecting a lot of people. So the idea here is, for the housing element, let's make sure at the beginning and quickly, fairly quickly, not in 5 years, that we know if the housing element is adequate. I'd like to just, if you wouldn't mind, just say one more thing. We have spent the past 5 to 7 years negotiating the housing element contents with the housing community. We didn't like all of them. They didn't like all of them. There is now a housing element working group, as you probably know, to try to work out some of the SB 375 housing element conflicts. We'd suggest that that's the better forum for this conversation. Thank you for your attention.
I'm going to ask once again the witnesses to not repeat anything that has already been stated.
Sandy George, representing the American Planning Association, and I think we understand the advocates wanting to make sure that they can look at the adequacy of these housing elements by a region. They need time to do that. We really do. APA and CSAC and RCRC did offer a 2-year statute of limitation as an alternative. But I have to tell you, from the local government standpoint, this lack of certainty and allowing a 5-year timeline to challenge the adequacy of a general plan is really problematic. 5 years is a very long time. We have very limited staff and planning resources as it is right now, but after 5 years, a lot of things are difficult to retain. And it is right now the entire planning period for everybody. For those that are going to 8 years, it's going to be over half of the planning period. They're already going to be starting their public process at the end of that 5 years for their next round of housing elements. From their standpoint, they see pages and pages of brand new detail. In the last 10 years, this is the list of changes that have been done to the housing element. Very limited staff to do that interpretation. Extremely difficult language to understand and always guess right. Whether you're a good actor or not, when you're really trying hard, it's pretty easy to miss something in a 1,400-page document of an inventory and 300 pages like Sandy, or 227 pages like San Diego had, of policy. That's a lot to take in. And yes, it takes some time to review, but there are probably 1 to 2 years of public participation before that where we want to hear what the problems are. That's when we need to be able to look at them and make changes. The problem is, after 5 years, it's very difficult to do that, and that uncertainty is going to be a problem for us for a very long time. We do think there are other remedies, as said, but we also think we need a timeout. This has been year after year after year of new requirements. The Housing Element Working Group itself is working on the implementation of 375 just because all of the changes have not been implemented yet and have not been nobody knows exactly how to implement every single one. There's a huge amount of questions with that. And we think 5 years is simply too long. It isn't a balanced approach. And I think you need to think from both sides when you're looking at this issue.
Next witness.
Members of the committee, Kathy Mannion, Regional Council of Rural Counties. My colleague from CSAC has mentioned the 21 rural counties that will be exposed over the entire 5 years of their housing element. That is our schedule. Once 375 kicks in, we stay at 5 years. And this, again, is very serious, and we oppose the bill. Thank you.
Next witness.
Catherine Pettibone with the Civil Justice Association of California. Without reiterating any of the other comments, we do believe that this expansion on the statute of limitations will expose a number of local governments and communities to additional lawsuits and cuts against the certainty that this code section aims to provide.
Any other witnesses in opposition? Questions? Mr. Alejo, do you care to close?
I'll just close. Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Again, this is not this is not about providing any new requirements. This is reinstating a 25-year rule that has been worked out just fine. In those 25 years, there's been very little litigation, 11 lawsuits in 25 years. That's less than one lawsuit every 2 years. And it does provide certainty. It clarifies what state law and the legislative intent is, and that was brought about through this misinterpretation of this 2008 decision. And you don't have, at least I don't know of any other areas of law that only have a 90-day statute of limitations. Even in small claims court, depending on the type of case, it's a 3-4 year statute of limitations for small claims. And to think that something so important as the housing element, you only have 90 days to challenge, really doesn't work, and you don't find that anywhere else in state law. So I ask for your support. Also, regarding the building industry, we included language to begin to protect the building industry that states that if that there will be no interference with any rights or protections that are already granted by local governments to developers. So we addressed that concern as well. So I just wanted to clarify that. I ask for your aye vote.
There's been a motion and a second. Do pass to local government. Madam Secretary.
Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Miller? The vote is 4-0.
Your bill's out, 4-0.
Thank you very much, members.
Mr. Fuentes, you're next.
Yeah, you want this one?
Item 16, AB 1216.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members. Thank you. AB 1216 is a reintroduction of Assembly Bill 2019 from 2008, which passed out of the legislature but was vetoed by Governor Schwarzenegger. This bill empowers tenants of affordable housing and local governments to enforce provisions of affordable housing law aimed at retaining housing as affordable. Current law requires that notice be given to a list of entities, including tenants and affected public entities, when an affordable housing development is going to lose its subsidy or in any way is at risk of losing its affordable status. All entities who are entitled to receive this notice have standing or the right to sue to enforce this requirement. Current law also requires that qualified entities be given the right of first refusal to purchase these developments. Qualified entities are defined as entities that agree to maintain the affordability of the development for a specified amount of time and are capable of managing the housing for its remaining useful life. Typically, qualified entities are nonprofit housing corporations. The intent of this requirement is to attempt to retain the units as affordable. Unlike Government Code Section 65863.11, which gives tenants and cities standing to sue to enforce it, the provision requiring that qualified entities be given a right of first refusal may only be enforced by a qualified entity. Standing, Madam Chair, is a very important legal principle that this bill gives to and extends to people that would have a lot to benefit from these notices, and I respectfully ask for your
You have witnesses?
Brian Augusta with California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Briefly, We are the sponsors of this bill, and you know, every year in this state we finance the development of new affordable housing, but we're at risk of losing ground if existing affordable units are allowed to convert to market rate without some opportunity to preserve the affordability of those units. We have in place a state law that says let's try to bring buyer and seller together and preserve the units, but it's missing a piece, which is that the tenants who would be affected by the loss of those units have no right to say, hey, I didn't get the notice that I'm entitled to, and you're moving forward with a sale without doing what the law requires. This bill fixes that oversight, and we would urge and I vote.
Thank you. Next witness.
Just Tressa Wallace with Shaw Yoder Antwi on behalf of the City of Santa Monica. We supported AB 2019, and we again support this bill. Thank you.
Any other witnesses in support? Opposition? Questions? Care to close?
Ask for your aye vote, Madam Chair.
Okay, do pass to local government.
Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Miller? The vote is 5.
Your bill's out.
Thank you.
Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning.
Morning.
I'm
Item
presenting
14,
AB 1103.
AB 1103. Go ahead, Mr.
Thanks very much. And I do want to begin by thanking you and your staff, Madam Chair. You've been very generous with your time and accessible, and it's been a great resource for me to be able to work with you and your staff on the tough issues involved in this bill. When I contemplated some reforms to the housing element law, I reached out to a fairly broad set of stakeholders that included local governments, housing advocates in my district, community representatives, neighborhood representatives, to get their suggestions on how the law could be improved. And the bill you see before you includes the proposals where we found the most consensus. There certainly was a lot of disagreement, but I think these were the areas where we found the most consensus. And the intent of this bill is certainly not to undermine the goals of the housing element law, but rather to provide some missing flexibility that will allow local governments to meet the housing needs of their residents and the workforce. And this is because, in certain respects, our housing element law does follow a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't necessarily fit all. And this bill suggests some creative ways for local governments to meet housing goals. So I want to also emphasize that in regions where there is limited space available for new development, and this certainly includes the county of Marin that I represent. For those of you that haven't been to Marin, something in the order of 80% of Marin County is locked up in federal parkland, state parkland, or permanent agricultural land with long-term covenants that prevent the development of that land for housing. So the bottom line is, in places like Marin, there's just a lot less space to work with, and that again underscores the need for flexibility. And one of the most important flexibility tools that we have is the conversion of existing housing stock. Currently, the law allows a city or county to meet up to 25% of its housing needs in any income category through conversion, rehabilitation of existing units. And this bill will broaden that conversion option by allowing second units, often known as granny flats, to be converted from non-affordable to affordable housing if there are long-term covenants to make sure that it remains affordable housing. We think that's an important flexibility tool. And it will also allow local governments to include the conversion of foreclosed single-family residence properties, again, if there are long-term restrictions and covenants to make sure that those properties remain as affordable housing. We've got some great examples of that in Marin County. My staff and I recently worked on a Habitat for Humanity project where a foreclosure property was purchased and converted. It's very hard because of the real estate market and the economics in a place like Marin, and I know we're not alone in this regard, to make affordable housing work. And these foreclosure properties are a great opportunity for Habitat and others to come in and provide much needed workforce housing. So this bill will help in that regard. Now, I want to go to one of the most difficult and thorny issues that we faced, and that is the one of default density. This certainly has generated the most conflict in my district, and it's because the regional designation and the accompanying default density for zoning is a rather arbitrary process. In statute, when we created this housing element law, we decided that referring to the U.S. Census process and framework was a good way to go. And so that means that if you happen to be in what the census defines as a metropolitan statistical area of 2 million people or more, you automatically get a default density of 30 units per acre. If you happen to be just outside that census-based framework, you're at a lower rate of 20 units per acre. That is exactly the kind of one-size-fits-all framework that is problematic in individual situations. And if you've been to Sonoma or Napa or Marin, you would probably regard them all as being of extremely similar suburban character. But because the census takes Marin into that metropolitan statistical area, we get the default density of 30 units per acre, whereas our neighboring and almost identical suburban communities have 20 units per acre. And that just makes it a much greater challenge to meet the needs that are allocated to us. So what AB 1103 will do is to allow local governments in that situation not to automatically get relief, but to go to their Council of Government and ask to be redesignated if they can make a showing that metropolitan is inappropriate in their particular circumstances. The COG could then consider redesignating that jurisdiction or approving an appropriately revised density requirement based on the specific facts at issue. Finally, we started out in AB 1103 trying to create an incentive for sustainable communities, and SB 375. I actually want to again commend your staff because there were some unintended consequences to the way that proposal had been put together, and I completely agree with the point that the committee analysis made, that it actually would have the unintended consequences of undermining 375. So I'm going to humbly withdraw that piece of the bill. And I should probably speak specifically to the amendments proposed by the committee at this point. I mentioned 375. Happy to take the committee's amendment to remove that. The default densities, there were two pieces to that. One of them, I completely agree, lines 33 through 37 of page 10. The committee points out that's duplicative of existing law. I agree, and I'm happy to take that amendment. I'd like to continue the discussion, though, with the appeal framework to the Regional Council of Government for the designation of metropolitan versus suburban. And then finally, the other technical amendments that the committee has proposed are very helpful, and I accept all of them. So with that, Madam Chair, I have some witnesses here to testify in support of the bill, and you will hear from the same broad diversity of stakeholders that I've been working with, a county supervisor, a mayor, and an affordable housing advocate from Marin County. So.
Would you mind having your staff come up and speak to my staff about those, to verify all those amendments? I want to make sure. I didn't quite keep up with everything, but while we go through that.
Happy to do that.
Okay. Next witness.
Okay. My name is Katie Crecelius. I'm a longtime affordable housing advocate. I'm a co-founder of the Novato Housing Coalition, which is an 8-year-old grassroots affordable housing advocacy organization. I'm co-founder of the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, which is a group of environmental advocates and housing advocates working together. And just recently, I'm co-founder of a new advocacy group of environmental, housing, and social justice advocates called Stand Up for Neighborly Novato. In addition, I also am an affordable housing developer. I have developed over the last 25 years 30 small affordable housing projects. I'm here to support AB 103. I think I've heard some of you speak earlier this morning about the difficulties of developing affordable housing. And it's not possible without local support and local elected official support. And local elected officials depend on community support for affordable housing. So I'm here to support AB 1103.
Yes, I'm Judy Arnold, and I'm a member of the Marin County Board of Supervisors. I know your first thoughts, no doubt, are thinking of Marin as the bastion of environmentalism, hot tubs, and peacock feathers. But I want to tell you that our Board of Supervisors is very committed and very supportive of affordable housing. And we support AB 1103. We're asking you to support it because it's going to provide us the flexibility to provide more affordable housing. Our Board of Supervisors has set aside $2 million in a housing trust fund to provide short-term loans to developers to build affordable housing. And we think during these economic times, we support the conversion elements of the bill, which will add to the stock of affordable housing. The president of our Board of Supervisors is also vice president of ABAG, and she tells me that there is regional support for this bill, and ABAG is going to take up this bill for support in May. Marin is a suburban county, like Sonoma, like Fairfield. We have a lot of agriculture, and we are more suburban than metropolitan, which is what is classified now by ABAG. So we think that cities and counties that meet the criteria for suburban should be able to present their case to the Council of Governments. We thank you for your consideration, and we hope that you will support this bill as amended. Thank you.
Next witness.
My name is Madeline Kellner, and I am the mayor of the city of Novato. And Novato is located in the northern end of Marin County. We're a city of over 50,000 people. And I'm here today to support AB 1103. We have been in the midst of updating our housing element over the last year and have had a lot of community concern about some of the parameters in which we need to update our plan. The last time we updated our plan, the rules were different. And what really got our community concerned was the default density, was the fact, given our economic times, we have foreclosed properties that we can't convert because there's not, under 4, you can't count those numbers. A lot of concerns about how can we really make this work for our town. And so with the support of Assemblymember Huffman, a number of the provisions that, a number of the concerns that we had, or our community had, were included in this bill, including the ability to use foreclosed properties to convert second units, to count rehabilitated properties. Those are all things, of course, with covenants put on them that we think would be extremely useful for us to be able to meet the requirements. We want to meet the state requirements. We have an interest in making sure that we have housing available for those that come into our community to work and for those that live in our community. But we, as I think you heard earlier today, we really require some flexibility to be able to meet those requirements. So we ask for your support for this bill. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Deanne Baker representing the California State Association of Counties. I think you will continue to hear from counties across the state that the default densities are just too high and we can build affordable housing without having to meet those thresholds. And we'll continue to work with you and your staff and trying to come up with perhaps a more comprehensive way of dealing with that. But I wanted to associate myself with the comments made by Assemblymember Atkins during the Allen bill discussion because they were absolutely accurate. We really need this flexibility, especially in light of SB 375, and we're just here trying to actually bring some projects to fruition across the state. So thank you for your support.
Any other witnesses in support? Opposition?
I'm not sure where I go, probably between the two, Madam Chair, members. First, I did want to thank the author and the staff for their work with us, and we appreciate the amendments that they've certainly taken. I just want to remind all of us that the default densities are have two purposes. One is about what is it to achieve affordability. The other is about making smart use of land as our population continues to grow. And as I was sitting out here and listening to the angst around the safe harbor densities, as was mentioned earlier, those were densities that were sought by local governments as part of a negotiation. And I'm actually wondering if we might want to talk to the author about simply getting rid of them. We could go back to existing law, which allows the locality to prove to HCD that any density will achieve affordability. That's still an option under the current law. The safe harbor densities were designed as an alternative to that. But if the alternative is causing so much angst for the original proponents, again, I wouldn't suggest doing that right now. I certainly haven't sat back there and thought it through, but that may be just the way to go, is get rid of the default densities. There isn't a safe harbor. You have to prove it to HCD every time like you used to, and we could go back there. So
You could already do that.
you can already do that. But since the safe harbor seems to be what is causing so much angst, anyway, I'll just put it out there for the committee to think about. I know Deanne indicated a willingness to keep working on this, and so thank you very much. Well, and we'll keep working with the author, absolutely.
Any other witnesses?
Thank you.
In opposition? Okay, any questions? Ms. Atkins?
I know we're on a time crunch at this point. I think, the issues raised just today on these very important issues related to the density and the technical committee, I wish I could sit through this technical committee as a policy wonk, because these are the very issues we're faced with as we look at the bills that come forward to try to help communities who I believe are trying to do the right thing, but we create other problems. And I totally agree with you in terms of the affordability. The densities and the affordability are tied together. So I don't know what the solution is, but obviously the technical working group has taken up some of these issues, and I don't know how we can get to that discussion at some point, Madam Chairwoman, whether it's a hearing and an update from them and some ability to have these discussions separate from taking up bills. But I noted, the discussion is clearly noted between the issues, and it's something that I'm grappling with as well.
And if I might, Assemblymember Atkins, I don't know that sitting here today and improvising, I'm ready to say that we should take on default densities entirely, categorically. I know that in my situation, I suspect there's other examples of this around the state, it's not so much the default density framework, it's how we got to a default density of 30 when we really should have been 20. And the only flexibility I'm asking for is the ability for local governments in that situation to make their case, not even to get automatic relief, but really just to go to their regional council of government, who I think is in the best situation to take a look around. I mean, the folks on the regional council of government have all had to absorb their own RHNA numbers, right? And they've all had to absorb their own default density. So they, I think, are in a perfect position to take a look around their region and say, does this make sense? And to provide a modicum, at least, of flexibility, even without getting rid of default densities.
Okay, it's late in the day, and I am sorry to say that unless you take all of the proposed amendments, line 28 through 37, I will not be able to support your bill. There are too many issues that still remain to be addressed. If we only support the amendment with item 20, line 28 to 33, there's a huge component there with a lot of issues that need to continue to be addressed. The process already exists. You know, if a city or county cannot meet their minimum standards, they can already have a process. There's already a process in place where they can say, these are the reasons, and this is my plan, and this is how I will meet my minimum requirements, or this is why I am unable to meet my minimum requirements. I really want to say that I commend your efforts to your local elected officials. I can't tell you, he has practically lived in my office. His staff, we've had to kick them out of my staff's office. You truly have been a champion in your community in trying to address this issue. However, I am in a very difficult situation here. We have a working group that has continued to meet and will continue to meet to ensure that all of your concerns, all of the concerns across this state are addressed and that are in some way fair to every city. I certainly, once again, I have been the victim of, we're going to send all the poor people, all the affordable housing is going to be built in your city, but nobody wants to send the money to help support those families. You have to, part of the issue, my heartburn with the whole redevelopment process and affordable housing is that while we're willing to commit to the 80% and we're willing to build to incentivize developers to build where we could bring in additional sales tax dollars. We're not that committed to the 20%, and that's really sad because folks need to be able to work and live in those communities in which they work. So unless, I hate to push this on you, if you want to hold the bill in my committee, we can have a hearing on this issue. We can ask the working committee to come in the fall, and we can have that hearing, and we can invite your local electeds to be a part of that process. I don't have an issue with that. I just cannot support the partial amendment that you have suggested.
Well, Madam Chair, let me just say I appreciate you putting it out very specifically for me. I would still love the chance to continue trying to persuade you that maybe there's a way, because the alternative to default density, which is kind of going to HCD and working under a very narrow and prescriptive framework, there's really only one way to get relief with HCD, and it's extremely narrow, I think still can be broadened. I think there still is room for flexibility. And I do note that the final amendment the committee has suggested places some intent language into the bill on this issue, which I think is very helpful. So I guess if the only way to have my bill today, Madam Chair, is to accept that amendment and keep trying to make my case as the bill goes forward, continuing to work with you and your staff and living in your office, I'm happy to do that. And with that, I'll respectfully request an aye vote and close.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for your hard work and your commitment to your community and ensuring that, their voices are heard. You have been outstanding at that. And I would welcome to have a hearing with you and have you be, full participant in that hearing.
I really appreciate
co-chair that committee hearing with me.
Thank you.
Okay, it will be due pass to local government as amended. Is there a motion? Okay, there's a motion and a second. Madam Secretary?
Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Jeffries, aye. Miller? The vote is 6-0.
Thank
Your
you,
bill
members.
is out. Thank you. You want to go? Ms. Atkins? I don't even know where my statement is.
I move the bill, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. AB 343 is basically a simple bill. It requires redevelopment agency project plans to identify strategies for the regional air quality and energy conservation goals in line with SB 375. With that, I will just say if there are questions or comments, take the folks in support. We're happy to answer any questions or comments.
There's a motion and a second. There are no questions. You have witnesses in support. If you would state your name and...
I'll keep it brief. Brian Augusta, California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, good author, good bill. We urge an aye vote.
Thank you.
Christine Minahan, Western Center on Law and Poverty, ditto.
Any other witnesses in support? Opposition? Seeing none, the bill has been moved and second. Referral to local government. Madam Secretary?
Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Miller? Atkins?
Aye.
Atkins, aye. The vote is 5-0.
Your bill's out, Ms. Atkins, 5-0. Item number 13, AB 936, Mr. Wetzel.
Very simple transparency on noticing of forgiveness of debt for redevelopment agencies. Respectfully request an aye vote.
The bill has been moved in second. Do you care to speak to the amendment?
No, I accept the amendments, and
Okay.
I thank the chair and staff for working with me to identify any improvements to the bill.
Great. Any other witnesses in support? Opposition? Seeing none. Do pass as amended to local government.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary?
Torres? Aye. Torres, aye. Atkins? Atkins, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Jeffries? Miller? Waso?
Aye.
Waso, aye. The vote is 5-0.
Your bill is out, 5-0.
Ms. Torres, I believe are you up? Okay. AB 1275.
Thank you so much, members. Since the governor has released his proposal to eliminate redevelopment agencies, we have heard a lot about how redevelopment agencies are using or misusing their authority. I believe there are very good actors and also some bad actors. I think that we should reward the good redevelopment agencies that are accomplishing the goals of redevelopment while promoting policies that shut down or penalize the ridiculously bad actors. AB 1275 would address a couple of situations recently in which redevelopment agencies have misused their authority. The bill would also allow a court to find a contract null and void if it violates the community redevelopment law. This would only apply to redevelopment agencies that enter into illegal contracts. We have not addressed the statute of limitations in this bill, and there are other reform bills, including Senate Bill 450, that has a statute of limitations, and we don't want to conflict with those. I plan to continue to work on some of these issues, providing the bill would move forward.
Thank you. Speakers in support?
Christine Minahan, Western Center on Law and Poverty. We are in support of this legislation. We need to be able to challenge and have a court declare an illegal contract or a financially ridiculous contract. And that is what this bill will do, quite simply. Rather than testify in length about how the bill would work, Deb Collins, my colleague, will provide a specific example which will touch on the points that would be resolved by this piece of legislation.
Good morning. Deborah Collins from the Public Interest Law Project. This issue came to our attention in some litigation we were involved in a few years ago with the Fontana Redevelopment Agency. And in light of what's happened with redevelopment agencies recently, especially entering into contracts rapidly between January and March in order to preserve money that they were fearful was going to be taken away from redevelopment agencies if the governor's budget proposal had gone through, we became very alarmed about those contracts and what's possible with those contracts. When redevelopment agencies incur debt, they have the power, they have the general power to enter into a contract with whomever they're entering into that debt with in order to repay the debt, a legitimate power. And it's inherent in the law that any contract they enter into should be legal and lawful, and that it should comply with what authority they have and what powers that they have. With the litigation we were involved in, it involved the Fontana Redevelopment Agency, and it had entered into a contract with a private developer to do infrastructure, which was fine. Infrastructure is necessary to do redevelopment. And the original contract that they entered into with them would have permitted the infrastructure and the sewers and schools and other public facilities necessary to develop a whole new area. And it was going to bring housing development, but no affordable housing. Nonetheless, the redevelopment agency committed, after a time that they were required to set aside 20% of all tax increment money for affordable housing, they committed to repay that debt to the developer with all tax increment for the life of the redevelopment plan. Now, that original debt was less than $1 million at that time because it was in 1982. But because of amendments to the contract and increasing it to a 15.5% interest rate, entering into agreements that required all future payments to only go towards the interest and not towards the principal, to never reduce the principal. In the last 20 years, that debt has grown to over $1.3 billion. And the taxpayers are paying for that. And because the agency also contracted with this private developer to make the private developer be a bondholder, even though it wasn't bonds, they guaranteed that they would pay money for, they would use the tax increment and continue to get tax increment until that debt is paid off.
Madam Chair, I move the bill.
Thank you.
And then they went and validated the contract by going to a court and basically going through a very summary proceeding of submitting a contract and saying, we think this is legal, and getting a court's validation on it, meaning a judgment that under the validation statutes can be grossly abused because those judgments can be finally and forever binding. And if they're finally and forever binding, what can happen is what's happened in Fontana is that they can continue to keep this tax increment forever and ever, continue to get it to pay off a debt to one private developer that never produced a stick of affordable housing, that exempted itself from any production requirements in the contract, and that has control under the terms of the contract over the redevelopment agency's power to actually carry out its redevelopment plan. Which doesn't benefit the community from ever getting the blight removed. It doesn't benefit the state that's supplementing and supporting education.
I think we definitely get the picture. Do you want to wrap up, or do you have one more?
Yeah. I mean, so what this bill would do basically is it would not enable redevelopment agencies to enter into an illegal contract, and it would not enable them to go and use the validation statutes to try to shield themselves from having that illegal contract attacked in court at the point it's discovered.
Thank you very much. Other witnesses in support? In opposition? Okay, we have a motion. I need a second. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry. There was an earlier motion and a second. So call the roll.
Do pass. Atkins?
Aye.
Atkins, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Miller? Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. The vote is 5-0.
Thank you very much. I think all we have left is the consent calendar. A motion and a second on the consent calendar, which is AB 826 and AB 931. If no other comments or questions, call the roll.
Atkins?
Aye.
Atkins, aye. Torres?
Aye.
Torres, aye. Bradford? Bradford, aye. Cedillo? Cedillo, aye. Hueso? Hueso, aye. Jeffries? Miller? 5-0.
Okay, 5-0. That concludes our meeting. We're lifting the call on 4 bills. Starting with item number 3, AB 505 by Ms. Harkey. The vote was 3-0.
The motions do pass to appropriations. Torres? Atkins voting aye. Bradford? Cedillo? Hueso? Miller? The vote's still 3-0.
Where's your folks?
Okay, we'll put it back on call.
Okay, the bill will be back on call. Item number 1, AB 19.
It's due pass as amended. The chair and vice chair voting aye. Cedillo?
The Fong bill?
Yes.
Madam Chair, I spoke with the author and have listened attentively to the discussion that took place in the hearing. Today I'm going to stay off the bill. Spoke to the author, encouraging them to meet with the parties, address the concerns that have been raised. I think the points were well stated, particularly as they relate to San Diego. But in general, I think that they're really, given the history of this bill, that there should be an opportunity for the parties to sit down and negotiate in good faith and then we can come back and evaluate it.
Thank you.
Waso, Jeffries. The vote is 3-1.
The bill would remain on call. Item number 6, AB 679 by Assemblymember Allen.
The motions do pass as amended to local gov. The current vote is 2-0. Bradford, Sedillo, Jeffries.
If I may ask, this is item 6?
This is item 6. Yes. Jeffries, aye. Miller. Mm-hmm. The vote is 3-0.
The bill will remain on call. Item number 7, AB 679 by, 697 by Assemblymember V. Perez.
The motions do pass to appropriations. The chair and the vice chair voting aye. The current vote is 3-0. Sedillo? Aye. Sedillo, aye. Waso? Aye. Waso, aye. Jeffries? Aye. Jeffries, aye. Miller? The vote is 6-0.
I'm sorry, the vote was?
6-0.
So that bill is out, 6-0. We will keep, we have your members to come and vote. Okay. We will keep the roll open for 5 minutes in order to get the members in here to complete the voting process.